Welcome to Mack-n-Cheeze Music Podcast with your hosts, Brian DeHart.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. I'm really excited to have Adam Puchalski returning for another episode. Today, we're discussing EQ and panning, which actually took me a long time to learn.
You know how to whistle, right, Brian? Just put your lips together. Blow.
There are a lot of intricacies in the process, and I don't need any sarcasm.
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
It's really amazing when I sit down and talk to people. I learn so much. All right, here we go.
They're here.
Seeing about what kind of microphone setups and
just
big
the
video studios?
Yeah, the microphones and the compression they use and everything. I would just love to just see the chain they use from the mic on Stephen Colbert's desk. Where does that signal go through?
Right. Yeah.
No matter what he or anybody else on the stage says, it's just perfect, balanced, clear signal. No spikes anywhere.
Oh, I'm guessing.
No squishing. They just got some nice shit.
Oh yeah. Well, big
billions of dollars.
Midas consoles on the soundstage. Hey, this is Brian at Mack-n-Cheeze.
Adam from WinStudioMusic.com.
Yeah, welcome. Thanks for coming back and listening. We really appreciate that. So today we're going to address a very, very tough subject, and we're going to discuss panning and EQ. Yeah, I'm not going to say that I'm a master at it, but I've had a lot of experience working at it, and it's been a real interesting journey.
Yeah, I've got habits that I've developed for better or worse. I don't know, but they seem to work for me. Yeah. But it's always an experiment. I'm always experimenting with panning and EQ to get any instrument or voice to sit where I want it, and it's not always easy, and sometimes it is. Those are the best ones when you pull up a voice and it's just perfect where it sits. And then you end up EQing around it, and those are rare, but those are some of the funnest mixes to deal with when you've got a solid point that is already set in stone. It just feels perfect already,
right?
And it's a just different kind of challenge to build the rest of the mix around that,
right?
But that's my favorite way to mix. If I have something solid I'm building the rest of the mix around, that seems to work the best for me.
Mm-hmm. So when you are in the recording process, are you considering where you're doing panning, placement, and EQ at that time, or do you wait until you have your basic foundational voices down? How do you do this?
It's usually God, that's hard to say. When I start thinking of the mix early on during the tracking, but it's usually not until after I've got the groove and just the sound of the orchestration in my head already. So once I get that, just the feel of the song itself.
Sure.
Then I'm just naturally thinking of the mix while I'm adding tracks.
So the process that you're talking about right now, is that with your original music? How do you approach this when you're working with somebody else with their original music?
Same exact way. Because if I'm working on somebody else's original music with them, it's because they want my input.
Okay.
So I'm not, very rarely doing something like that for pay. Mm-hmm. It's usually I'm involved because I either like the material and I want to make it work, or they like what I do with it and they want to hear what I can do with their stuff because they're at a loss. Right.
Do you have roadmaps set out before you start the process, or you just plug and play?
Just plug and play.
All right.
Yeah. It's hard to plan ahead because every time I used to do that, I used to think, I'm gonna have this whole road map and this is how we're gonna. That's usually you stray from that in the first 5 minutes.
We're gonna turn right at exit 162.
It's like okay, in fact I'm gonna deal with this first, and it's usually for a positive reason, like wow, that guitar tone is way better than I expected. I thought we were going to fight with that, and then now I've got like that's like that one solid rock that it's like, oh, you know what? We don't have to mess with that. Let's build it around that.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like when you don't have that, then I think this. I've been, like I was telling you earlier, I'm trying to analyze how I work more, but I think if I don't have that solid tone or instrument or whatever that I'm going to work the rest of the mix around, I'll find it. You know, I'll create that first, that first stick in the mud or whatever that just is going to be solid, and everything has to go around it.
How should we approach this conversation? Shall we start from simplest and go to most difficult, or is
that's probably the best, because
both the tasks
they're
can
kind
be
of
pretty
the same.
They're kind of the same, absolutely.
The simplest and the most difficult, the process is exactly the same, and it's And I don't. Some of it's luck,
right? Yeah.
I mean, I've pulled that. I usually, if I'm using an EQ that I'm not that familiar with, like some of the ones like raves, like the Renaissance ones.
Oh, yeah.
Parameters are kind of weird. They're not what you grew up with.
Of course, yeah.
But the presets are usually pretty good starting points. And every now and then, I'll come across a preset.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
Like,
right, yeah.
Oh, geez, that sounds great. I think I can make it better. I'll mess around with it a little bit. No, I actually made it worse, so I'll just leave it. And then I'll just work some other stuff around it, and if it works, it works.
So when you say old school, are you talking about the traditional 4-band EQ? Old school?
Yeah. Just parametric,
Right.
rack mount parametrics.
Sure, yeah.
Even graphic EQ. I never really used graphics in the studio. I had a couple.
Right.
But I found I was always using parametrics.
My only application for graphic EQ has been playing live.
Yeah.
On the mains. And it's really important. A lot of it's kind of similar. You don't have you don't capture all the overtones in the studio that you would live. I mean, you've got sound bouncing off of walls and ceiling and floor. Yeah. And sometimes with that graphic EQ, with you've got 32 bands on each channel, right? And so you grab the frequencies that are vexing you.
Yeah. Oh yeah. For just big, wide sweeping cuts. Those graphics are great.
So this is a home recording studio, and Otis wants to come in and say something.
Oh yeah.
You might hear him back there meowing. Could you let him in for just a second?
Oh, yeah. Let's see what he does.
Yeah. First of all, you have to be able to get out. There, hi, Otis. What are you doing?
What you doing? Meow.
You got something to say, huh?
Meow.
And that's was it.
He's just curious what was going on in there.
You guys are having a conversation without me. How dare you? It was great, master, indeed. Yeah, so in your process, where do you start?
So I'll mess with the panning first.
Okay.
And I'll do I'll just look at the signal. Is it a mono signal? If it is, I'll start with the mix. I'll bring everything up to the levels. I'll just leave everything straight up. No panning, no EQ whatsoever, and I'll just mix the levels, just so that I can hear everything. Get as close as I can, and then from there, it's usually pretty obvious to me what needs the most work right away.
Right.
9 times out of 10, it's going to be either the bass or the drums.
Vocals.
Sometimes the vocals. Yeah. If they're problematic, but that's usually where I'll start EQing and panning.
Right.
Because I know I'm probably going to do something stereo with the guitars, so I'm going to save that for last and place them where they're needed in relation to the drums and the bass and the vocals. But
do you mind if we do the Life is Hard track on this? And so that's really interesting because Love is Hard. I'm sorry, Love is Hard track, because you have your main vocals panned hard left at the very beginning of the track.
Right.
And then as you bring in the multiple harmonies, then it goes across the mix. And that's a really, I thought that your approach to that was super interesting, because most people will center the lead vocal right down at the center of the mix, and you have it over on the left-hand side.
Yeah, and that was...
We're going to play that track for you later on in the podcast.
Yeah, and it was... That was probably more for just keeping the groove and just the feel and the energy.
Yeah.
You know, where it needed to be, because
right.
It didn't need to be that upfront, in your face energy.
Right.
At that point, and then there's other instruments going on that are doing some pretty cool stuff too.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so it was more. It was just more band interplay at that point, rather than this guy's up in front. Because at some of those points in the song, it's like, God, everything counts.
Right.
So much. It's more than just some of those tracks are more than just background tracks. I mean, they're critical parts of this tune. That's what makes the tune work.
Yep.
And and I guess that's another way of thinking. It's just, what kind of song is it? If it's, your basic, pop sort of orchestration and arrangement,
it's probably, I would describe it as a neo 70s style of rock.
Yeah.
Rock ballad.
Yeah.
Not ballad, but rock love song.
Yeah. And it's just
about pining away and
there's there's formulas in the song structure, there's formulas in the mix, and then panning and the placement, and it's just, you know what to expect, and you get what you expect every time.
When you did the background vocals for that, you painted this incredible sonic landscape. Did you do that? Did your lead singer sing harmonies, or did you create those harmonies yourself?
No, he sang them.
He sang them.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
But you did. You obviously.
I did a lot of editing.
Yeah, you did a lot of editing.
I did a lot of editing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
that's one of your best vocal tracks ever, by the way. I mean, it's astounding. Yeah, it's so good. Yeah.
And that was just one session that we recorded the vocals.
Yeah. And did you use an AKG 414 on that? Is that what did you use?
No, that was the Carvin.
Really?
I think it's. Wow. I can't remember but it's the Carvin tube mic.
Yeah.
I think it's a CTM 100 or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, probably Carvin tube CTM. Yeah.
So you remember the process on that? How did you EQ the brittleness out of that?
Actually, when I record vocals with the Carvin, I never EQ'd the tracks going in. I always just flat.
Right.
I didn't need it.
But post,
I'd have to check.
Yeah.
Because it's been a while.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that hard to mix. There weren't any harsh frequencies I had to get rid of.
That's good.
It was more just enhancing the beef and just getting the beef into it that I wanted.
Right. Because that vocal track is super smooth, man. Yeah. It is really smooth.
But that took some work, because the original tracking was, we just had the guy come in. He'd never actually recorded in a studio before, but he was, he could sing.
He could sing, yeah.
And
you would have never known that by the performance. Good Lord.
Yeah. Oh, and he just, his voice sounded great. But John thought, he says, "Hey, this guy I work with, I think his voice would be great for this song." Mm-hmm. Lo and behold, it was.
Yeah.
And that song was in the work for years. It was just one that was just kind of pecked away at.
Tell me which one isn't.
Yeah, I know. But when I finally got to doing that, it was like, okay, I'm not going to get a second chance at these vocals. So I just started editing away, and I pieced it together and made it work.
So how many? I hear 3-4 vocal harmonies on that. Is that what you had?
Yeah, and I think I recorded more. There was more.
Yeah.
And different variations, that we recorded, and I just picked out the best ones.
Yeah.
Fine-tuned some of them. I may have even changed a note, from like a fifth, down to a third or something in one spot, or just cut a syllable out or whatever. It's amazing what you can do with an isolated vocal track these days.
Right, that's exactly right.
But, it's well away from creating, an artificial track. So it was just minor cuts where they were needed. But most of that, it was just EQ and panning to get it to sound as full as it was. And all EQ and panning.
And do you remember how you placed the harmonies across the mix? Did you after you got to the chorus, did you pan the main vocal to the center of the mix at that point, or did you leave it on the left-hand side?
I put the lead straight up the middle.
Okay.
And then fanned the back out, and I'm pretty sure I put them way in the back.
Yeah. No, it's great.
And just mushed them together with reverb, super smooth, and I think that might have been the last opportunity I had to use the Lexicon plug-in.
Oh, yeah.
Which was just...
That's heartbreaking, isn't it? Heart-rending.
It sucks that I don't have it anymore.
Yeah, well, I've had that happen on upgrades, man. I mean, I had to buy a whole slew of plugins all over again when I moved to Pro Tools 12.
Yeah, I thought I was going to.
Yeah.
When I built the Windows 10 system, but it took a couple weeks, but I managed to get almost everything back.
Good for you.
But the Lexicon, that was probably the biggest loss.
Yeah.
I could not get that back. Not that it wouldn't run on the system. I just can't get it.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Right.
It came with... It was part of one of the Sonar producer update packages or something like that. And it's like, oh, look what you have now.
Looking out through these eyes, hear your words, lonely lies. This time I cry. This broken heart is mine. I cry. Love is hard. Goodbye.
So, quick story for me and the importance of EQ is that this is many years ago, and I had a chance to borrow a friend's Rhodes, and this was like an Australian manufactured Rhodes, pre-Chinese, right?
Right.
And so it was a beautiful mic. But being the rookie that I was, I don't think I had ever worked with a condenser mic at that time. And so I had a friend come over and she laid down these vocal tracks, and I had
You distorted the shit out of it?
No, man, I had the diaphragm backwards.
Oh.
And it was like when I did the initial recording with the playback, I didn't notice it, but when I went to start mixing the song, it was like, how come the vocals sound so distant?
Yeah.
It was like, what's going on? It was like there was like a bunch of comb field reverb in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And I realized after the fact that I had the microphone turned around.
That'll do it.
That'll do it. And so the EQ process became pretty interesting because you lose a ton of everything and that. So I had to boost mids and boost low, and
just the presence, the proximity effect is gone.
Yeah, was no proximity effect. So that was it was okay. It wasn't great, but I took the vocals off of that and still haven't recorded them. I'll probably never do that song again. That was a long time ago. And then another time, I was using the TS1 Chameleon Labs. And so there's a variable control on the preamp, so you can run the preamp super hot, and when you run the tube super hot, it sucks in more sound. I mean, it will like grab everything
and just compresses it naturally.
It doesn't know what it does. Is it just grabs every single little tiny nuance. I did a guitar track with that microphone, and you can actually hear the guitar player's shirt rustling on the on the guitar. But I'm digressing right now. And so what I ended up with was such a hot, brittle, signal that I tried to EQ the crap out of it, and you know, drop the 4K down, rolled it off, boost some of the low ends to it, and it was just killing it on the 2K, 1.5 to 2K, and I dropped that down. And this is why it's so. There was nothing I could do to fix it. There was nothing I could do to fix it.
You can take away all the frequencies you want, but you can't add frequencies that aren't there.
No,
if they're not there, you can't add them in. You can
record it,
take them away, and that's as good as it gets.
Do the recording properly from the beginning, and you know, and I always double check my tracks when I do the initial recording. I listen back to the very first take and look for audio artifacts and look for any kind of noise coming through, because you can't get rid of those in there either unless you have real serious editing.
Yeah. Well, or without affecting parts of the signal that you want to keep.
Yeah. So one of the songs that I've done in the studio is a smooth jazz thing, and it's actually on my YouTube channel, on the video that I shot introducing my studio and the people that I work with. That thing, man, has like 34 tracks on it, 12 of which are guitars.
Oh,
right?
God.
Well, what it ended up
not playing simultaneously.
No, of course not. But different rhythm tracks. I actually, to have more control over the guitar tracks, there are basically 3 different rhythm tracks and a couple lead tracks on it. And what I did is that I would assign each part, like chorus, verse, bridge, different guitar tracks.
Oh yeah.
And it's because different parts of the song required a different placement of the guitars and also a different EQ even.
Yeah.
And so that was pretty interesting. So a friend of mine used the Rivera and a Paul Reed Smith with that. Oh yeah, man. And we just hung a 57 in front of it, and it was perfect. But there's so many variables on the different parts, mixing in all the voicings on the keyboards and the lead parts, and it just like, you know, there was a lot of panning on that. Like one rhythm guitar track would not necessarily be in the same side of the mix depending on what part of the song it was on, because it just didn't hang.
Yeah. And sometimes if I have a part that it's like critical to the song, but it just doesn't sit in the mix anywhere.
Yeah.
Then I just go rogue, and I'll just start. Basically, I'll just beat the shit out of it. I won't be delicate anymore. So I'll like compress the hell out of it, or I'll reamp it. I'll run it through one of the Waves, preamps or something like that. Or just compress it, or I'll pull out I call it my surgical EQ, and I'll just dig, and it's kind of like what I do with some mastering, or remastering. I'll go in and I'll look for frequencies that piss me off.
Right.
And I'll just bring them right out in the forefront, and then I'll just, I'll make little notes of, where I'm hearing parts. And sometimes you got to go to a certain part of the song. It's just like, this big chorus is coming along, and now you got like 2 extra vocal lines in there, and there's something about it that's just bugging your ear.
Right.
Is it a mid-range? Is it a high-end? You usually can't tell. Mm-hmm. And once you find it, it's usually not what you thought. You think it's mid-range, piercing your drums.
Sure.
And it turns out to be, like a low-end cut gets rid of it completely, without affecting the bass. And it's like, I just found that miracle one. But it's usually, I do it as surgical as possible. The narrowest band, just notching it as precisely as I can.
Right.
And I actually just recently cleaned up a track for a friend of mine that it was acoustic guitars, bass. It was a full band with acoustic guitars, bass, vocals, and drums. The drums were barely there, but they were annoying as hell. Mm-hmm. And the person that wrote and recorded the song, they said, that's what's ruining this track, is this drum track, right? Mm-hmm. She said, I'm hoping you can mix it out. I'm like, well, can't mix it out.
So I'm sorry.
It's a mix. It's an old mix off a cassette.
Oh boy,
You know?
you can't get rid of it.
No. But I managed to bring the drums down enough that they were barely noticeable.
And that worked.
And it worked, and she loved it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very, very
and I listened
cool.
back to it. Oh yeah, it did work pretty good.
So,
But that was a bunch of surgical EQ.
Sure.
I boosted it with the compressor first, and that was one case where I had to because the signal was really low. So I brought it up as clean as I could,
right,
and then I just started looking for those frequencies that were highlighting the drums. So I tried to highlight the drums as best I could to bury everything else.
Right.
So I found like 4 or 5 frequencies that I could say comfortably that these are predominantly drums coming in through these. So I would cut them, and I'd start bringing them out until just when I started affecting the rest of the mix. And then I stopped and brought them back up a little bit because I didn't, I wanted to be on the positive side of the tones that were good, and left it. And I said, that's as good as I could do. And that was obviously enough because
and
I loved it.
what you're talking about is kind of a warning for me, because when I start getting to the point where I'm using compression to boost signal, boy, oh boy, man, if you haven't got that thing EQ'd right, you're going to bring out all the bad frequencies, and it can turn into a nightmare if you're not really careful.
It can be, I mean, if it's not perfect, it can be like putting a shellac coating, on pencil writing. It's like, okay, you can't erase that anymore. It's there. You can try to, dull the finish a little bit, but that's it. You can't redo it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I've had the same challenge with too much limiting. Too much limiting can bring out the line noise of the inputs. So you got to be real careful about that too.
And that's, don't ever forget that, because that can, you don't usually see that coming until it's too late.
Until it's too late.
You have to, and that's how I'll bet you everybody's learned that the same way. It's just like you go back and you go, fuck, I gotta redo the whole thing now because of that one stupid limiter that I thought was a good idea.
Yeah, man.
I've ruined a lot of, in the past, I've ruined a lot of mixes using limiters thinking they were so great, and they were.
Yeah.
But maybe for that, if I was going to release that single guitar track all by itself, sure, it works great. Yeah, in the mix, not so much.
So I have a basic foundational technique that I use on my EQ, and I learned it running live sound. It's basically on my EQs, and I learned it. What I start off with is basically a frown, and on the, as far as like on a what style would it be? A shelving EQ where you can take and adjust the signal. So I roll out the low end and I roll out the high end, and so the diagram for the EQ looks like a frown.
Oh yeah.
Right? And so I'm trying to remember what sort of EQ that it's shelving EQ, I guess is what it is, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm so informative.
I know low pass, high pass showing, but at this point it's all just kind of second nature. I just do what comes. That's why I'm trying to pay more attention to how I do things, so that when we're talking about it like this, I have a better technical understanding of what I do myself, because I don't think about it anymore. I just do it.
So why it's so important to roll off the low end, especially if you're doing live recording in your house, is because you never know when there's a dump truck running by or a jet's going to fly by or any of that stuff. And so you're going to get that, you're going to pick up that noise. And so generally I just roll it off before I hear it. Yeah. And then I can always put the frequencies back that I want, but just to start with the foundation, I roll off the end, I roll off the top, because most people aren't going to be able to hear past 14K. Most people are like 10 to 12, so those frequencies aren't going to be missed anyway, but that's where the hiss and the brittleness and all that stuff comes out.
Well, and a lot of times, I mean, I'll use the low and high pass on I won't say every track, but I use them on a majority of the tracks just to aid in the separation.
Right.
If I don't need anything below 40 on this track, and
Absolutely.
anything above, say, even as low as 12K, I'm getting rid of all of it, and that track's going to sit there all by itself, and that's when I would start panning. So
Right.
I save the panning for after the EQ, and then I'll tweak the EQ if I pan it, to somewhere, because I start with everything right up the middle, and then if I pan it, I'll check the EQ again at that point too. And then, because if it goes all the way hard left or hard right, you might be clashing with something that you didn't expect to. When it was up the middle, it's coming through nice and clear. You put it over there, now the bass frequencies, it's kind of muddying up with the organ sound that's over there, because you got the organ in stereo, so you got the low end over here, and now, okay, so maybe you got to pan that a little differently, or now you're playing with the EQ on the organ to get those two to play well together, and that's where the fun begins. And that's, to me, that is a blast. Just trying to find the right spot for every instrument.
Yeah.
And when you find it, and turn it up loud, because I do all that stuff at a fairly low volume.
Yeah.
Because if I want, say, a mandolin track to be present but not in your face, but I want you to hear, oh, now there's a mandolin, I want it to be no mistake. That's all EQ. I don't use levels. I'll bring the level to where I think it should be, and then I'll find the frequency that I want to stand out. And I'll use the EQ. I'll drop the level a bit. If I'm boosting a frequency, I'll obviously might need to drop the level, but I try to not mess with the levels as much as the EQ and the panning once it's there, because the level, it's almost too easy with the level. It's almost a cop-out. How can I explain this? This is the
nuanced part of the program.
Maybe that's for a different discussion, because it's hard to explain.
We're actually full of nuances and other things.
Yeah, especially when you're using a visual to describe sound. When that's what I use when I'm in the studio. I'm using visuals in my own head when I'm working with this stuff. I can't explain how I do that without. You'd have to be here. Right. You'd have to hear me talk and do something to go, oh, I get it.
And maybe we'll do that in the future when we start doing screen views on these things.
Yeah.
So my most important rule that I follow is that, and this is really amazing how applicable this is to different parts of mixing, but our ears are tuned to hear our voices. And pick that out as the most common frequency that your ears pick up. And so that frequency response is like 1.5K to 2K is what our human voices are. And so if I have an instrument that I feel isn't coming out, and this is a double-edged sword, because there's two ways that you can destroy parts with this concept as well. But if I'm looking for something to just pop out a little bit more so people can hear it, I tweak my 1.5 to 2K up a little bit. The idea, as far as I'm concerned, is that if I'm trying to set my EQ properly, it's always better to take frequencies away instead of boosting them. But at some point, after I've taken frequencies away, you want to recapture some of that.
Yeah, and like I said, and then if I'm at that point and I'm not getting the results I want, that's when I say, okay, well, there's an appropriate way to do things like you just described, but sometimes they don't always work.
It doesn't always work.
And then you just break all the rules. Boost frequencies, I mean, just throw 18 dB on one frequency to find out what's this one doing.
Right, yeah. There's
that's how I analyze what's actually going on in a song. I'll boost frequencies and I'll just, maybe I'll just run a graphic EQ up to the top or a parametric and I'll just drag the frequency band across the top just to hear what's really going on, each frequency as I, just pan along the scope of the frequencies, and you find a lot of stuff out by doing that, and you might realize that, oh, you know what? I do need to actually boost over here ever so slightly, not 18 dB, but I've gone on like bass tracks especially and boosted
glad
I'll
you're
take
talking
like,
about bass tracks.
like 6K and I'll take it. I'll boost 6K like 12 dB. You know, I'll put a low pass filter on, and it's amazing what you can. If you're not getting the results, just try some extreme stuff. Don't be afraid, because there's no, don't be afraid to fuck it up. And that's the thing, because you're going to.
Anyway,
you're gonna screw up mixes all the time. I mean, that's part of the fun.
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny that you should.
But that's why I started saving prior mixes from day to day.
Good idea.
Every day.
Every day.
If I'm working on a mix today, I'm going to open it up, and the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to save it as the name of the song, whatever today's date is, and save. And then I'm going to start working on it, because that's why I'm not afraid to fuck it up.
Yeah.
And if I'm not getting the results that I want, I'm either going to walk away, or I'm going to start doing some extreme stuff just for fun and learning, and if anything, I might not apply anything I just learned to that particular song. But it's amazing what you learn when you take your tools and just put them to the extreme.
Yeah.
Just to see what they can do. Because then if you know the extreme range of what that particular plugin or tool can do, then you can use little tiny bits of it to fine-tune things more
makes sense.
intelligently, because you know what this tool does. It's like, okay, give me the scalpel instead of a machete.
Things I was speaking about in the two-edged sword on mixing things in the range of the human voice is, especially in like a live situation, acoustic guitar and acoustic piano basically play in the same. You basically are heard back in the same range as the human voice, and so I've found live, if one of them's not cutting through, and this also applies for in the studio as well, I'll put the acoustic guitar on one side of the mix and the piano on the other side of the mix, and just get them out of each other's way. And that way, because a lot of times you'll have a really great EQ on both of the instruments, but you put them in the same aural zone, and they won't work.
No.
And there's cancellation. There's frequency cancellation.
And that's when you find yourself tempted to start cutting out all the mid-range that provides all the definition you need, and that's when you ruin the mix.
Yeah.
And if you don't remember what you did, because if you solo it out and do that, it's like, okay, now it sounds okay. You put it back in the mix with everything, it's like, it's horrible. It's even worse.
Yeah.
And it's...
And Adam was talking about saving. So when I get to the point where in the final stages of working with a mix, we're doing silly, stupid, incremental things like boosting the 4K like 1 dB or 2 dB in the mix. And so when I do that, I write out what time it is, what the fix was, and put that on the save. I mean, I'll be working on a mix in the afternoon, and I'll have 6 to 10 different saving points on that, and what time of day that I actually did that. So I could go back and look at the files and know exactly where I am and what I was and what I was doing in an incremental thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's been really important when I'm at the point where we're doing final mixes, and every wave file that I'm saving to disk has got that description of the save point on the save. So the WAV file /MP3 correlates directly to what the time for the mix was.
Yeah.
The exact verbiage.
Yeah.
So I know what's going on.
I know that's kind of a different topic.
Sort
what
of.
we're talking about,
Yeah.
but I do the same thing because, and here's an example of why that paid off.
Exactly.
We had like a 3-month-old version of one of the Wicked Snakebite songs.
Yeah.
Right? And there was something about the vocals that Joey really liked. Mm-hmm. You know? And,
Was it an EQ thing?
more than likely.
Yeah.
More than likely. I don't remember exactly.
Sure.
But it was probably a combination of the
Right.
EQ and the reverb on that particular one. But 3 months later, probably, 17, sessions later, or no, I think on that one, it was probably about 10. But, I had this mix and it was really full, fat, thick. I mean, very close to the mix that I'll probably play for you a little later. Mm-hmm. But except for the vocals, I did some stuff to them and they sounded good, but Joey liked how they sounded before, how they felt better before. And he went back and I went, oh, son of a bitch, you're right.
Yeah.
It's like, this was good, but that's better, But so I opened up that file, took notes on everything that I had going on, some settings, if I had plugins in there that were, on, edited presets or whatever, I would
Right.
save them as the name of the song so I could carry them over into the new one. And then I'd take everything I just learned about that vocal take and that mix, and then I applied it to the new one. Still had to tweak it because I'm mixing it in with everything else that's been mixed 10 times since then too.
Right.
But I managed to get the vibe that we lost when I EQ'd it completely different before, which was good. It was full. It reacted. It just had a certain bounce in the mix. But he was right. What we did previously was better. And I made that fit in the mix by going back, learning from what I had there, applying it to the new mix, and it worked out great. But if I didn't save all that stuff,
Right.
it would have been like, gosh, I don't know what I did. And it was EQ and reverb was the fix on that. Now, since we're talking about EQ and panning, when I start adding reverb, then EQ becomes almost as important.
And it depends on how you're using the reverb placement because you could use it either stereo or else you can apply it in one corner of the mix as a mono submix as well. So
exactly.
it doesn't.
And are you gonna adjust the EQ that's feeding the reverb, or are you gonna adjust the EQ of the reverb coming back out?
Right. Pre and
are
post,
you running
right,
in
right.
it? Yeah. Are you running the EQ pre or post, or is your signal going in pre or post?
Yeah.
I mean, it's. Yeah, and you have to try everything. When you're problem solving with a mix, you have to try everything because I'm not kidding. 99% of the time when you find the solution, it's nothing that you would have just thought of off the top of your head. It's usually an accident from going extreme and experimenting and finding the range of your tools and then going, you know what?
Yeah.
I can do this. I can make this little notch right here and get rid of that. And lo and behold, you just learned something new, and you're a better engineer all of a sudden.
Drive the road you call your own. Keep all the loose ends not fight so long. Time to make yourself at home. I'm gonna get there, you're more than welcome.
I've got this great story, and I'll put this song on the mix too. So, on this podcast. So, we're doing an acoustic guitar intro to this ballad, and the folks that I'm working with say, "Yeah, man, I got an acoustic guitar." They bring in this old Sears Jumbo. I mean, the guitar's like 20 years old, and here's the crux of it: it had the original strings on it, and so basically tune it up, and the strings were so dead they would just thunk.
Oh yeah, it's like playing a pancake strung up with rubber bands.
They were very percussive thunk, but they were thunks. And so in order for me to pull that out, I took my trick where I add the 1.5 to 2K in that, and finally got some tonality on the strings, compressed the crap out of the thing. I mean, it was like 10-to-1, 15-to-1 ratio, just so I could get something out of the strings. And oh my God, it's one of the best acoustic guitar parts I've ever recorded, man. It is so big and so fat and powerful. It's just great. But just the tool that I had to work with was like, are you kidding me? I had to make them retune that guitar every 30 seconds.
Oh yeah.
Excuse me, that was a lot of cut and pasting.
Yeah, it's like my ukulele.
Wait up, girl, I wanna know your name. Wait up, girl, I wanna be your friend. Hey, girl.
Like, it's just I don't play it very much.
Right.
You know, I bought it. It's a good one.
Yeah.
You know, I wanted a really good ukulele for the studio,
Yeah,
so I
yeah.
bought one, and it was the same
Smart,
deal.
yeah.
It's just like if I play it,
I
you
got
know,
loops and samples of ukuleles here.
yeah,
That's how I use
if I
it.
sit and play it for like an hour, you know, it'll stay in tune.
Right.
You know, but if I just grab it and I'm just plunking away, I gotta constantly keep tuning the thing.
Right.
So yeah, for the studio, for just grabbing a quick take,
Right.
it's not an efficient instrument.
So
Different topic,
Let's
but yeah.
talk about foundation. So bass drum and bass guitar can get in each other's way. You know, I have one friend, his concept is that the kick drum should be covering all the low frequencies, and he mixes in bass on top of that. But I know of plenty of funk bands where the kick drum is not carrying the low frequencies. It's all about the bass. The kick drum is more of a percussive instrument than a percussive voice than one carrying the bottom. So how do you approach that?
And I've done it both ways. Like you said, it depends on the song.
Yeah.
If it's a funky tune where it's the whole drum kit is more of a percussion instrument than holding down any kind of frequencies.
Right.
And something like that, the bass is like boom. It's got to be down there.
Whereas if you're doing metal, you want the kick drum to cover that bottom voice.
Yeah, and actually, and if I'm doing metal, I actually even use less bottom end on both.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And so that they're both a little.
Well, the guitar's going to carry a lot of that too.
The guitars are going to carry it, and the bass. So I mean, I like the kick drum to be just a slappy thud rather than a boomy thud.
Right.
Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Slappy thud.
Yeah.
And the bass, just almost a picked sort of attack.
Yeah.
Whether it's fingers or not, I try to get the not tinniness out of it.
The brightness.
I just want the brightness. I want
the
note definition.
You want that piano tone.
Yeah, when that bass is hitting an E, a low E, I want to hear that low E. I don't want to hear just
like a piano string.
Feel. I don't want to feel the low E. I want to hear it.
Yeah, right.
You know, where in like like a blues tune or something.
Or old school Motown.
Or anything. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can feel the bass, you feel the note, you don't necessarily hear the low E on the bass
right.
or whatever. But it's
Fender,
there.
That Fender P bass with the old strings.
Yeah. And they
The
sound
thunk.
and they sound
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
You know,
sounds
but
great,
they have
yeah.
their place. They have their
Right.
place in the mix. And it feels proper. It's
Right.
not you can't compare different styles. It's like, oh, I'm gonna mix this funk tune just like this, and I'm gonna mix this metal tune just
Right.
exactly the same way. No. That metal tune's gonna sound like crap.
Well, we're talking about in realms of authenticity right now too. I mean,
Right.
if you're doing like some Americana / old school bluegrass tracks or even jazz, you probably want to go as far as your kick drum is concerned. You probably want to have it open, and probably not having so much low end EQ on it.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you want there to be a nice kind of ring going on in the kick drum, and airiness to it.
Yeah. And I've trying to get a little bit of that
Yeah.
head ring
Right.
out of a kick drum.
Right.
The only way I've ever been successful with that, just me personally, is to copy it onto another track and use that track to get that, and use the other
Oh,
track to
right.
get the rest.
Right.
So I'd use two different tracks, EQ completely different to get the one
Oh, yeah.
sound.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
And that's if I'm trying to, if I want to hear
Right.
the drum, the acousticness
Right.
of the drum, that's what I'll do that. And that way I'm not
Right.
thinking about the rest of the mix. I'll just try to get that drum to sound the way I want it. And now I got to put it in the mix. And now you have to combine those two signals into one signal before you start EQing it in the mix, or you're going to screw it up again.
Right.
And you might screw it up again anyway, but that's part of the fun, and that's why anybody listening
Yeah.
that's never worked on a mix, you're gonna, what the hell did you do? Why did it take you 10 hours to do that mix? I just told you.
Right.
Because take what I just described and do that for 10 hours.
Yeah.
And
You know
on
what?
every track, I mean, sometimes different sections
Yeah.
of the song, you know, I might change the EQ in real time just because that section of the song needs just a tiny bit more high end. I mean, and I don't want to affect the whole mix, or I might do it on a submix. There's hundreds of points and in time and signal chain to affect
Right.
the mix, and it's up to the engineer to decide. There's no rules. There's no right or wrong. It's just you have to not be afraid to just dig in,
Right.
and
Make
tear
them-
it up. Just have your good work saved. Just, you know, always save that old copy. Start a new project where you left off. Start from there, and then save that. If you screwed up, no big whoop. You can go right back to where you started without losing anything.
Yeah. So, and I agree totally with Adam on that. And if you're kind of looking for a little kind of a bass hack, bass guitars replicate really well at 120, and it's kind of a matching point for kick drums. And so what I will do if I'm just starting out with a mix, I will take and roll off like this 60 hertz, get rid of it off of the bass completely. Not everybody agrees with me on this, but that's where I start. And then I kind of put just a tiny 2 dB bump at 120, just over the zero. So I've got 2 dB bump on top of that. And
Right.
so it gives some presence, some fatness, and it's a place to start. It doesn't mean that that's where I finalize that, but it's just a place for me to begin so I can kind of get an idea of where I want the bass placement to be.
And I take that a step further.
Yeah, please.
That same thing, and I'll do the same thing. I'll work with the kick first.
right.
You know, usually I'll do this with the kick, and then with the bass, and usually with the kick, I'm cutting a frequency, depending on how it was recorded. If
Yeah.
I'm the one that mic'd the kick drum, I have my flaws. I know what I'm gonna have to deal with.
Well, I'm going to interject with you real quickly because I use a lot of kick samples that I have done myself. And you'd be surprised how different one EQ will sound from another EQ.
Oh, I know.
I mean, one EQ, the same exact kick drum sample, and this is the acoustic sample that I've done here in the studio. I'm not using other people's stuff. One song will need like a huge boost in the bottom end, and the other song will need a huge boost in the top, and you roll off the bottom. I mean, it's weird.
Yeah.
It's really weird.
It is.
Doesn't even sound like the same kick drum, but it is.
Yeah. and that's yeah. So yeah, depending on what kind of song you're working on,
Right.
it's going to need something different. But what I kind of used as just a rule is if let's say I take out let's say I take everything from 20 hertz down. I'll just put a 20 hertz high pass on there,
Right.
and then let's say I'll cut at about 120. Just a little, just a small cut. Maybe have the cue set to sort of a just a
Right.
small little bell, right? And I'll bring that, and once I have the kick drum, acting the way I want it to, feeling the way I want it to feel, I'll go to the bass and I'll do the opposite.
Oh yeah. See,
I'll just do a mirror image of whatever EQ I just did on the drums, whether I cut and boosted, and sometimes I'll do one cut here and then a boost here.
Yeah.
I'll do a mirror image of that on the bass, where if I boost it on the kick, I'm going to cut on the bass. If I cut on the bass, I'm going to boost it on the kick. Or whatever.
That's a great trick.
And then
That's a bottom end hack right there, folks.
yeah, those frequencies will not clash.
EQ, though they will not. That's an EQ hack right there.
Yeah, and it's
Adam just saved you 5 years.
you got to remember it's there, because if you start messing with anything else, it's just one of those things. You just, once it's set, you keep it in the back of your head and just don't forget what you did.
Yeah.
And because if you start playing with bass, especially if you have an organ or something like that, then you're going to have to do like a three-way version of that kind of thinking, and then it gets more complex and more fun.
Yeah.
But that's I mean, to me, just getting a good mix, it's EQ, panning, and reverb is, I mean, if you have good performances, that's 85% of it.
It sure is.
Compression it's very important, very delicate, but the EQ and the panning, it's where it's all at.
Yeah.
And it just has so much to do with just the feel of what's coming through the speakers.
Absolutely.
And you can't put that into words. And it's even, like I said, we're sitting here trying to describe it. It's not easy to describe how you come to a decision in your head to do some of these moves.
Well, so what is going to be, at this point, what you have heard through the podcast has been some of the final results of this very subject that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
So,
in other words, have you learned anything?
It depends.
Yeah.
Depends what you're talking about. You're talking about mixing or just my life?
Yeah, exactly. Because I'm enjoying both.
All right. Well, I hope you learned something today. Thank you so much for coming in, tuning in to us. Brian at Mack-n-Cheeze here.
Adam from winstudiomusic.com.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you much. Have a great day.
Yeah, don't be afraid of the plugins. Use them to the extreme.
There you go.
Don't be afraid.
Last thoughts. That's right.
Yep.
Bye.
Have fun.
That's all for today's podcast. Thanks for listening. If you want to get in touch with us, www.mackncheeze.com or Brian at mackncheezemusic.blog. All righty. Have a great day. Thank you.
This is the end.
Hey everyone, if you enjoyed this video and you got something out of it, please subscribe to Brian at Mack-n-Cheeze on YouTube. Just press that subscribe button and you'll never miss another episode. Hey, and you got that going for you, right? All right. Cheers. Have a great day.